Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, and welcome to Family Office TV, and of course, my Family Office Masterclass. I'm, of course, because aren't I always excited about the special guest today? And I mean that every time I say it, because I think part of the thing about being good at interviews, competency matters, but I actually think being curious and sometimes pushing boundaries and getting the best out of the guest is more important than simply even from my perspective. So I'm glad to do the interview today and all the interviews I do. If it was just me and my guest, because I record it, I take a lot of notes and hopefully I'll walk away learning something. I know that is going to be the case to many of you with today's guest. I was introduced to his writing, which is extraordinary, relatively recently. And we had a chance to connect where literally I was taking notes after notes after notes. Now, I know you all heard me say, we all want to talk about investing. We all want to talk about what's going on around the world in geopolitics. Those are more engaging dialogues. But what really keeps families together is the topic that we're going to talk about today, addressing the challenge of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, which JUs and many other dignitaries within the family office community have made popular. And whether it's the US or around the world, it doesn't matter. Generally, that thought holds true. We know it's not investing or taxation that often leads to that downfall. That can be contributing factors over time, of course. The biggest threat to the family, it's no surprise, it's the family. So today, we're going to talk about family governance. And we're going to talk to someone who knows it and changed some of my paradigms relatively recently about how to think through it and the impact that it has on risk for a family. When I talk about creating or reimagining into a top 1% family office, when I talk about what I do in sovereign risk and risk analysis and assessment for the super rich, the foundation of both of those effectively comes down to the topic that we're going to talk about today. I don't know if I can make it exciting. Actually, assume that I probably can. But more important than that, it can make you competent. So financial wealth without a purpose is a very poor glue. Let's go with that word for keeping families together. On that note, our special guest today is the one and only Nick Eynern. He is a 5th generation family member, and he's a founding member and director of Family Hippocampus. Nick, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
And everyone, a little bit of a note. Unfortunately, Nick is halfway around the world. He happens to have a highly poor and down Wi-Fi connection. So we're doing this where I'm visual. You're stuck with me. I'm sorry. And Nick is only going to be via audio. And there is a chance that, unfortunately, it may get a little worse. We're going to keep our fingers crossed. Worst case, I'll do a wrap on it. And we'll have Nick back multiple times in the near future. But let's hope this part 1 goes well. Nick, in terms of that description that I kind of gave, we're going to start off very simple and basic. How would you define governance and why is it so important for a family?
Well, there is a simple function, I think, which is actually quite complex, because what we have is a complex dynamical portfolio of various risks that are in the family. One is financial risks, and you alluded to that. This is mostly talked about. And in the end, it's an asset liability problem. With that come operational risks and on the legal side and the tax side and so forth. So that's the operational risk part. What is very, very dominant in the whole portfolio are behavior risks. So, and think of it that the whole wealth has been created through human capital, the individuals in the family, and the internal social capital, i.e., how the family worked together and supported each other to go through the ups and downs when you create a business. This is compounded social capital over generations. and it is asymmetric in time,
Mhm.
because only one foul apple, one drop of ink can actually color the whole water. And that's the danger of it. So the human and social capital have created the wealth, but the same token, it also is likely to destroy it through misbehavior, through conflicts, through misunderstandings, non-communication, not having a vision together, a shared vision, a shared reality, and many more things that disrupt and perturb social systems from the internal. And you also said it, the internal and external crisis. Well, also there's research saying that all the crises that we are actually are going through are internally. So it's not about what is impacting the system from the outside, it's how the system deals with it.
And we're taught when learning about family governance, the simple terminology is that it basically is shared decision making, in this case within the family. We're not necessarily talking about corporate, quote unquote, governance. Now, how I was taught originally, and in meeting literally over the years with thousands of families, that there is a simplicity to, let's call it top down. Meaning, if I'm the wealth creator, I think this is kind of a Warren Buffett quote on investing. I like a committee that's an odd number and it's less than three, effectively meaning him. Now, maybe that was taken out of context. Maybe it was meant to be a little comical. But I do admit the simplest form of so called governance is for the person that owned, created, quote unquote, the wealth to effectively be the decision maker because they don't have to take in the other inputs of other family members and they can make quick decisions. Now, I know what you're going to say, and you're going to be 100% correct, but I did have to set the stage. Broadly, what you're probably going to say is that's not inclusive of the family. They're not going to feel a sense of engagement, and that's going to cause friction and challenges within the family. And it doesn't teach, maybe that's even the key word, it doesn't teach the family about open communication and shared decision making, which will lead inevitably, probably upon incapacity or death, if not sooner, of that wealth creator to effectively a collapse of the unit of the family.
Well, sorry to say that I'm not saying this. Rather, I would see it in the light of cultural change of various belief bubbles. And we also have to distinguish between smaller families, patriarchal families, which is sort of the family wealth 1.0 and 2.0. So when you have a nuclear family, that can be the case. I totally agree. But even further, when we look at dynastic families, those who are multiple generations and have like 50 people or so, and also in terms of a wider social context of pluralism and more mental diaspora and physical diaspora, it becomes more of a challenge to actually keep the family together. So I think these are two different ontologies we need to look into. And I agree, family governance ultimately should lead to a more coherent state of the social system we call family and connected to the business, which again, also in former years, around the 20th century, we had kind of the house model where family and business and family would be one unit. Again, also here we have a separation, particularly in older families. They are shareholders now. They're not necessarily sitting in the one house at the same dinner table every day. So with that, even different challenges come towards us. How to create cohesion. Now, what I think family governance and how family governance is being thought about is that we have a family governance, we have a structure, and this structure will create this coherence, will synchronize the system. Now, from my point of view, it has to be the other way around. We have to synchronize the system first, and then from synchronicity, structure emerges. That, to my mind, makes it more sustainable. I'll give you an example. So also in my family and in other families I know, yes, they have family governance. And yes, it has been challenged here and there, and it somewhat kept the whole thing together. There's also something like the perversion of intent. What does that mean? That means you intend the family governance to keep it together, and it achieves the opposite direction because it's taken away freedom
Exactly.
degrees. So this is what I'm saying here. What worked in the past with a less pluralistic society, with less mental and physical dispersion, with a mindset which says, yeah, of course there's a business and I wouldn't dare to go anywhere else. Why would I? So in today's world, we have multi-optionality. We have the freedom to become suddenly lawyers, architects, what have you. In the 20th century, that wouldn't have been the case. So it's kind of a mindset. Yes, of course, I stay with the family and I be here forever and I die here. So that has completely changed. Not only in the nuclear family, but also in the dynastic families. So I think the old way of doing governance has to change.
And would you agree that technically not having governance, there's kind of no such thing because the family's making decisions every day. So you're just not identifying and talking within the family about what type of governance and not just vision and mission and family constitution, but you're almost, from what I hear, claiming look more into culture and in terms of being in sync and synchronization before you just rush out and hire someone to draw up or help the family create a vision and mission, create a family constitution. Let's assume it's a first generation family of wealth. They had a liquidity event and they were to come to you and they're relatively a small family unit. What would be the first thing that you would do and what sequence would you follow?
Well, it is far and foremost about disambiguation. And you're right, there's always a form of governance, and it may be one person that's exerting that governance. And everyone assumes quietly this is the case. And around that, many ambivalences, with an ambivalent space. You have information asymmetry, by the way, a big driver of conflict. So we would need to come together and start creating a safe space for everyone, in the sense that everyone dares to come forward and says, look, I assume that, I don't know whether this is the right thing to do. And apart from assumptions, we also have judgments. So these things need to be cleared out. And there's also probably a huge amount of trauma within the family system. So we need to start working on that, connecting the people authentically. And then in that safe space for everyone, and everyone has to contribute to it, and it has to come basically from the leader, we can start synchronizing the family system.
If you don't mind, Nick, play along with me a little bit, just to give our audience an example that I know would take hours to days and a lot of work. We're going to try to do it in 2 or 3 minutes. Let's assume that I wish I was so fortunate, but someone in my age bracket that whatever has a family, let's define it as a marriage and a child. How would I, if I had a liquidity event that was substantial for a business, when I hear you talk, it sounds wonderful in an academia perspective. I'm respectful of the work that you do, given my knowledge and the work that I do in the family office community. But if I could look at it from the perspective of my personality trait, does fit a pretty typical profile of an entrepreneur that would quote unquote have an exit, I am going to skew to a little bit. Let's assume that my son's a teenager. Like, what do they know about decision making that leads to success. Now, again, we're past the family business. We're now moving into the family office and the family from a cultural, a tribal, a more innate, I guess I would call it, perspective. You may have a little bit of a hard time with my personality stating that I should be more inclusive when I made decisions that have been successful. I'm still of the right mind to make decisions. Why should I be inclusive of a family that is wonderful? I may love them, but I don't feel they necessarily have the experience in business and finance moving forward. Tell me where I'm wrong and what you would tell me to be more inclusive.
Well, it depends what you want to do with the wealth and your legacy. Do you want to take it to the grave and spend your way out, or are you interested in multiple generations of wealth and that carries your name?
I'm going to answer that, Nick, so we could treat this as a little bit of a quasi-live mini session. Yes, I'm interested in a legacy that lasts beyond me, and that is my interest moving forward.
How about giving your family the opportunity to learn how to do it?
Can't they learn from the experiences of me being a successful entrepreneur? They have 24/7 access to me, but shouldn't I be the person making decisions on the direction of the family, not just our financial capital, but our other capitals moving forward until the rising generations in the family go through a certain level of competency through education and real life experiences, or I could be more inclusive to them in the joint decision making. Where am I wrong?
They don't have to make decisions, by the way. But if you want what you just said, you want to give them time to adjust and to gain psychological ownership. Because when they don't have psychological ownership and one day they have physical and legal ownership of the wealth, this is where things go wrong, because they don't know what to do with wealth. And there's also a nice study that actually shows that 25% of heirs didn't know what to do with wealth when wealth transition time was on. That's why they lost everything. Is that what you want?
Well, Nick, my concern is over at the country club, I met with a generational family member that's my counterpart in my age, and they felt that the money was effectively placed into trust. They were not going to have decision making on that trust until they were 35, and they felt it was an advantage. They were making poor decisions in college and early in their career in their 20s. Their parents were concerned about their partners, including in marriage, including in business, and felt that they would not reach an age of some mental clarity and maturity until their mid 30s. Why is that not good for me? It worked for them.
Look, we have to distinguish. When do they get access to the wealth? And then when they get to the wealth, what do they do with it?
I'm concerned what they're going to do with it.
Yeah, it's a cultural thing. Of course you should. But then there's a whole sphere of influence that you have over them, and make them understand what does it mean to be accountable wealth owners. And once you have achieved that, you don't need these governance structures, by the way, that also are conducive to creating chaos in families, because they're taking away freedom degrees. And I also come from a family where the wealth owners were segregated and shouldn't touch anything, even though it's an operating business and we were shareholders. So it doesn't make any sense, you see, when you just keep them as trust babies, when you segregate them and don't make them cultural adjusting to the wealth they will be owning. You can have as many trusts as you want. They will ruin your legacy. Well, that's the risk. Because why? Because they can. They have enough money to throw around.
Nick, I have to say, probably a concern that I have, and I've read your work in JUs and others, and I get it. Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves is more common by a wide mile than not. And that does concern me if I'm concerned about legacy. It seems like keeping the culture within the family, and I'm assuming there may be married-ins that could lead to children. In today's world, there's more blended families. I'm not going to have control who my child, quote unquote, is going to marry per se, and I wouldn't want it. But these are all things that make me feel threatened relative to my family might have been around for dozens of generations. I'm the first one that created quote unquote notable wealth. I want to make sure that we're able to grow it from an educational, a social, and a purely wealth perspective. So that scares me, giving up control, not knowing what's going to come into my family and even outside forces happening now around the world.
You should be scared, and but do you think structuring it away will do?
Apparently, from when I read your great work and that of Matt Wesley and Dennis Jaffe and again the iconic JUs, I should be concerned that now when I met with my attorney, who's one of the highest rated trust and estates attorney, they have a whole bunch of documents. It's about this big: generational trust, setting up LLCs, possibly setting up a foundation. They're telling me that if I follow this pattern of what they created, that is going to assure, wink, wink, that I am going to have generational wealth through a dynasty trust. Why are we arguing with them?
Because structure alone doesn't hack it. It gives you maybe even a false sense of security. Let me go the other way around. So when we're looking at governance, top-down governance, what we implicitly assume is that the social system is a machine, a linear piece of work that we can control. The truth is, family systems are organisms. They are complex dynamical systems that we cannot control. We only can solve them iteratively. And what you want to create is you want to create a culture around cohesion. Let me put this differently. If we just looking at the structure, it's all about compliance. Now think of yourself. You have the option to speed or not to speed on the motorway. Why would you speed? Yes, because you're late. You don't want to be late. So you're thinking, I should go 30 miles over, so I'll make it on time. Then the next thought is, well, yeah, I risk a fine. But what's the expectation value of me getting caught and paying this fine? That's lower. That negative benefit is lower than the positive benefit of speeding. Oh, well, let's go and speed. This is compliance for you. There's always a trade-off. And when you just have a structure, you will find people trying to arbitrage that compliance window. Now, if you have a family and your next gen being committed to the cause, creating a legacy, perpetuating the wealth, and increasing the wealth, when they are committed, they don't even have the dilemma to think between should I speed or should I not? Because you're committed to the cause. Of course you don't speed then. That's the major difference.
I'm a big believer, and maybe I'm a little bit too much of a critical thinker and a logical thinker, but the importance relative to my rising generation that's going to carry in my legacy, and I hope beyond me, I'm looking at things like their capacity to adapt and their capability, meaning their internal knowledge. To me, that equals, and both you and Matt Wesley and others have written about, and Christian Stewart, who's great as well, about competency. So I want my family to be competent. Is there something wrong with me for wanting that and realizing it's probably hard to be totally competent when you're a teenager or even you're in college? You're just not there yet in your total critical thinking skills, and maybe more importantly, your emotional intelligence, where your brain is still evolving through probably your mid-20s.
100%. Tell me about the competencies you would like to see in your offsprings.
Given that I'm a little bit financially centric, I would like to have an understanding of their competency from kind of how the world works to looking at it from a geopolitical perspective to understanding economics and finance and effectively investing, and understanding that it was a variety of factors that led to a business exit and success that led to the wealth from a financial wealth being created. But there still are lessons that we learned from past generations in the family relative to our culture. I could argue our religion and our focus that is important to me as quote unquote the so-called head of the family. So I'm afraid that the perspective of the rising generation or generations are not going to feel maybe that sense of urgency, the competency, and the ability for them to move forward. Now, I know we're all fans of Nassim Taleb and his work on you go from fragile to resilient to being anti-fragile. The only way that I know to be anti-fragile, and that's probably a lofty goal that will never perfectly happen, but it is to have capacity and capability, to have competency, to identify blind spots and have the opportunity to move ego aside. So these are things that are not easy for me as a principal. And how do I engage my family and go through this process?
Very good. Moving ego aside, where I want to go to is in terms of competencies, what you want to have is strong emotional intelligence, understanding your feelings. And Viktor Frankl said there's a space between stimulus and response. In that space, you make conscious choices. When we're under stress and we don't have control over our emotions, that space is non-existent and we are reactive, causing conflict. So that's the first thing I would instill in the youngsters. But, I understand, we are mature and all that. But still, even at our age, we are able to learn and must learn, because education is not one way. It has to be in between generations. Now, let me finish. It is the emotional intelligence, which is the prerequisite, the antecedent of social intelligence, meaning having the ability to join the other person in their mental model of the world and create a genuine connection. By the way, it also creates safe space, and it is conducive to it and helps synchronizing the family. It helps also to deal with stresses, and it frees the intellectual part of the brain to be smarter about taking in and processing the financial part that you alluded to. So it has multiple tensions. So I would say if you look into instill competencies, it starts with the emotional and social, and then it goes on to the technical part of things. And you're absolutely right. It's a neuroscientific fact. The prefrontal cortex, where all the intellectual processing is happening, is not fully built until mid-20s. And that can wait until then. But why don't you want to use the time leading up to the 25 to train them and give them the training required and necessary to create authentic cohesion and commitment to the wealth and the legacy?
Well, I think the word that I'm maybe looking for is stewardship. And I think a challenge that I noticed in the young one that quote unquote I have, wink, wink, and others, is that they feel a sense of burden and a sense of how do I live up to what I've accomplished? Part of what I accomplished is from having a challenging upbringing when I was younger, and that motivated me to be successful. I think I also got lucky to some degree along the way. How do I instill in my family that it's not just creating the same level of wealth adjusted, quote unquote, in today's time that I did? That wealth is more than just simply financial, as I might have described it. It has other aspects as well. So how do I help my family be a steward and not feel the burden, I guess you could say, of wealth or creating what I created?
Well, it's on you to give that to your family, to make them understand what gave you the possibilities. And actually, you can also lift the burden, saying, yes, I was lucky and I was tenacious and I made it. And this is how I did it. And you know what? If you want to do something else, I'm very supportive of that. So basically answering to the pluralistic world we are living in and give them the opportunity. So my kids, I tell them, look, you don't have to have a business degree, but you need to understand what's going on. then obviously they need to learn German, and they need to have a job, because I'm saying, look, you can't rely on it. You have to have purpose in life, otherwise it doesn't work. And it is about connecting authentically and giving them the opportunity to unfold and take away the burden, because you didn't say it to them, but they may have these limiting beliefs that have created, or you have given these beliefs to the youngsters without knowing it. And beliefs can be changed. You can do a start, but you also can get professional help that help changing these unlimiting beliefs and set them free.
I read in some of your work that led me to you that linear thinking is the assumption that the analysis of the past will help to predict the future, and that that's futile. That's not necessarily true. But I've learned from gurus who are now dead, aka reading their books, whatever it may be, von Bismarck, Napoleon, great thinkers and writers. Like, why would you say that me learning history sets me on linear thinking and may be futile for understanding things that may be repeated moving forward? Why is that wrong?
I'm not saying this is wrong. What I'm saying is, when we have a linear thinking, the same input will deliver the same output. That's linear thinking. And in a non-linear world, like complex dynamical systems, the same input will lead to different outputs at times, because constellations have changed. And look, where we live, there's a social and cultural context, and there's a situational context, and these contexts are different. And insofar, linear predictions may or may not be true. I mean, our brain predicts all the time, and then we make corrections, and then we try to learn from these corrections. Still, to be honest, even in financial markets, we don't know where the Dow Jones lands at tomorrow. There's no way of knowing it. So what we can do, we can look into history and see how dynamics played out there, and then we can look into the current situation, of course. But again, we also need to take on board a different context. I'll give you a different example. So when it comes to cultural change, in the past, they say it takes 3 generations. Now, my question is, that was not a very pluralistic world. Now, in a more pluralistic world, does this change happen much easier, faster? So again, looking into history, yes, there was a certain context, and we can read the context because we know it today. If you make predictions now, we anticipate and assume we know the context, but then the outcome might be different. So in the end, what I'm saying is, we shouldn't be blinded by any predictions we may or may not make. We should be agile and quick in changing to be not to be caught on the wrong foot.
Given that you're recommending to me that although it may be easy, that top-down governance is not going to be the wise move, likely longer term, I read in your writing that relates to adaptation capacity. Actually, according to you, top-down might even make me or my family more fragile than it was before. Talk a little bit about adaptation capacity.
Yes. So if you take a glass of wine without the wine, when you throw it against the wall,
if you said whiskey, I might be able to pull that through right now.
Well, so some form of glass, so some sturdy structure. So you throw that against the wall, right? And it will break because it doesn't have any freedom degrees. And in physics, systems that have no freedom degrees are prone to chaos, entropy. Now look at imagine a football. You throw this football against the wall, it bounces back all the time. That's resilience. It's way better because already we have freedom degrees. So you can actually move. There is adaptation capacity in a football because it can adapt to the impacts. And you mentioned before anti-fragility, the term of Talib. This is a hydra. Are you familiar with the animal a hydra?
Yes.
Very good. So just for the audience, it's kind of a huge reptile dinosaur with snake with 3 heads. And when you cut off one head, 2 more grow. Meaning, in that case, the more heads, the stronger you are. So you actually thrive on those impacts. Now, that's an adaptation capacity, which is not just adapting, is actually using the energy to propel forward. And this is what I mean. So when we look at families, social systems, when they don't have any freedom degrees, when they are in a corset, which, by the way, family governance can be perceived as that at times. The family may not have enough adaptation capacity. So through that change, which again is a non-linear change, sort of a sigmoid function, which a strong acceleration bit in the middle, then the family system fragments like this glass. If it has adaptation capacity, it will bounce back. So there's the impact. And yes, we are back to where we were before after that transition. And when that family system is anti-fragile, it will come better out of the on the other end than it went into the crisis. So it becomes stronger.
So you would say that without adaptation capacity, likely in time, it's almost inevitable that it would tip into chaos?
I think there is a high likelihood. I mean, look, it is no family has no capacity to change. The question is, how much is there? And is it enough for the impact force to be able to come out better on the other end? Or is it just far too less adaptation capacity than the system has? And that correlates with the likelihood of a family system breaking up. And yes, it may even mean chaos. So the family system will then settle back, but maybe completely fragmented, meaning the family wealth is in 1,000 pieces. And the family loses the capacity to get the best deals and to negotiate fees with banks and asset managers and all that. So in the end, even from an economic perspective, we are stronger together.
And therein lies the benefit from the bottom up of a family effectively in proper governance. I don't know if I'd quite say being on the same page, because having disagreement and having open discussion is a good thing. And again, be careful of blind spots and always, like Ray Dalio talks about, move ego aside. So I'm going to get out of my quasi role play there for a while. That was interesting. That was totally unplanned. It was fun. It was a good experience. And by the way, don't think that the verbiage that I said is necessarily how I feel, although there are aspects of it that I may. But generally, for an entrepreneur with an exit, relatively in my age bracket, I think that's generally going to be a pretty common way in a smaller family unit without other siblings in the business and the exit. It's probably how a fair number of them, from doing this for 20 years, from my experience, are going to think. Now that we spoke a little bit about adaptation capacity, and by the way, audience, I know we're buzzing along. We're not going too deep into any one subject, and we're going into pretty analytical and academia topics. So there will be breakdowns of this that me and Nick will do in the future months to follow that will focus on one more specifically and make it greater sequential. But you're getting, I don't know, a primer, a teaser today. So I'm going to read part of the writing that you did. Family wealth can be depicted as nonlinear utility function of socio-emotional and financial wealth, which a family seeks to maximize. But where there is light, you're such a good writer. Shadows can be expected. We call this family risk. If you could talk a little bit about that and how that ties into governance.
So again, it is a risk portfolio of behavioral risks, of financial risks, and operational risks. And again, coming back to, and these risks are all highly interrelated, I must say. So, for example, you've got the overspender in the family, so you need to go and reflect that in the investment portfolio. Then there's a reason why he or she is the overspender, which is then to be solved on the behavioral side. Of course, you can structure it away. You put everything into a trust and everything is hunky-dory. Yes, this has repercussions because now that family member is expropriated, even emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And may even cause more harm and reputational risk because they can. Again, then we are back to the behavior side of things. And yeah, the behavior risk with family governance alone, what I'm saying here, and we've talked about the fragmentation of a family and having not enough capacity, adaptation capacity. Well, about adaptation capacity is a function of synchronicity.
Mm-hmm.
So a highly synchronized family system will have enough adaptation capacity to withstand and to thrive on impacts. It will also have the capacity to speak to that overspender, and maybe on the way, even the overspending, which is a form of compensation, will no be longer necessary anyway. So this is what I mean. It ties all together, and yeah, and I know what the article you are referring to. It is a form of optimization, but how does that optimization work? Not in a completely linear way, because the system is not linear. So it's symmetry breaking.
And maybe on that note, continuing in that same article and using my personal experiences, being in the community for a long time and being someone who's very, very active in mitigating risk. Again, when you develop a week-long masterclass called Sovereign Risk and Disaster Preparedness for Billionaires and Family Offices, it's safe to say it's a pretty important part of who you are. A family office typically assists the family with risk identification. And I think I can make the argument that probably should come first. And effectively, you have analysis, which is planning and strategy around the identified risk. And then you have optimal risk responses to mitigate risk across all domains. That is great. You're ahead of 90% of family offices and family governance by doing that. My only problem with that is that sounds a little linear. We all know the Mike Tyson quote, we have a plan until we get hit. We know General Dwight Eisenhower, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. So risk identification, risk analysis, and optimal risk responses, how could that become less static, linear, and more dynamic?
Yeah, when the plan ends, the fun begins. But what I also write in this article, we are basically along a complex dynamical system of risks, for which we need to find a hedge in the market by curating a complex dynamical portfolio of service providers.
How do
we cannot assume, it's not like buying ETFs and being futures short. It's not that easy. That we know. But what I'm saying is, if we don't understand the complexities and the complex interrelations within the risks, with the risk domains of their portfolio, we should not go out and look for hedges, because the hedge is likely to be very wrong. And under-hedging and over-hedging will occur nonetheless. And also, mind you, when it comes to complex dynamical systems, from a mathematical point of view, the math for that is still being developed. There's been developed a lot. But to what degree you can codify and have that all done by artificial intelligence, I'd be rather skeptical. It needs human beings to understand and to connect with other human beings, to understand the risks and then find a proxy portfolio in the market. And that also shows you where I see a family office actually should be. A family officer or a family office should be a family risk manager. And
Yes.
it inevitably must have an analytical and phenomenological openness to behavior risks that are happening in the family.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about that. So, yes, broadly speaking, from a financial perspective, if you have a single family office, financially, you're very, very rich. Having 1 or 2 years of a little below par investment returns is not going to have any impact. Now, we can make the argument purchasing power with negative impact over a decade or longer. Yes, that might end up being impactful. But for the most part, I could argue the family office's job, in my opinion, is proper decision making through governance, its capacity and capability, its effectively competence, and that is done through the quality of the people, arguably the technology, but I think that's pretty strong, and the systems in place to make it a sustainable enterprise. You talk about, and I agree, typical family risk, nonlinear, a combination of financial, including, say, liquidity, operational, and behavioral. The first two, financial and operational, isn't that more quantifiable? That there are metrics, there is talent, there is technology to help measure those risks.
I totally agree. That's why it seems to be easy. That's why, and there's a lot of money in that. So, and that is the traditional domain. But what I'm saying is it's not enough. You don't have to
Behavioral
do the
risks.
behavior risk management
Yes.
yourself, but you have to have the openness and also get the specialists in where, if and when needed.
So is that where behavioral risk, the third of the risks that I noted, that is not as quantifiable, that at the moment AI and technologies can't necessarily address as well as maybe the first two. In time, that may change, but we're not there yet. So this goes to a quote, and I didn't invent it, but the greatest threat to the family is the family. Therefore, Nick, how come no one in the family office is really dedicated to the family? And that leads into potentially what some Christian Stewart, yourself, Jay and Matt Wesley and others may define, and I completely agree, as a chief learning officer. But behavioral risk, circling back to that, is more qualitative. It's complicated. It's the dynamics within the family. How do you help to become more quantifiable, if it's even possible, on behavioral risk to make better decisions moving forward?
So first of all, I wouldn't say no one in the family office world is thinking of behavior risk. Um, my impression is that it could be more. And it may not surprise you to hear that I'm working on a serious game, which allows us then to hone into the behavior risk of a family and quantify it as a value at behavior risk,
Hmm.
which gives a rough indication what are the implications of the behavior risks you are having in the family. They're not that obvious because they are not measured, and they're also quite hidden. So psychometric and sociometrics, like I call it BRAMS, the Behavior Risk Applicable Monitoring System,
Sure.
will help to understand and give indications where we are in a bid to actually remedy exactly that problem. We can measure the returns in various ways. We can look into do a tax audit and all these things on the behavior side, not so much there. But also with the help of artificial intelligence, I'm sanguine that we will have also measures here to bring these things to the surface and frame it in a language that everyone can relate to.
Okay, now we started off A little untraditional, but basically talking about governance, I think from a little different perspective that most of the audience is used to, because there's already a lot of good books written by some of the people that I noted that are going to be a little bit more classic and traditional relative to the value of governance. And I completely agree to sustainability in the family long term. Effectively, it kind of is going to be the number one subject. But now we transferred a little bit to risk. We got a little bit academia and a little bit deep, at least relatively in a short time frame. And there are elements of the audience. Maybe it's a traditional officer in a family office. Maybe it's someone who services a community in the world of finance, legal, and accounting that are going to have a little bit of a hard time putting together, what the hell is Angelo and Nick talking about? And how does the governance that we briefly went over tie in to risk that we discussed over the last couple of minutes? If you could tie the two together, I think that would help.
Yes. So I think of it, one doesn't work with the other. One is synchronizing the family system and then create a governance structure. So again, this is also a complex dynamical system. So we need to synchronize bottom up. Then there's a structure, and that structure inevitably will also impact on the synchronization. It's just a matter where you start. So I'm a staunch advocate having both. One without the other doesn't work, but start with a synchronicity rather than with a governance.
And if you don't mind, one more time, a brief definition of how you define within the family synchronization.
It is basically a perfect coordination of family members. Think of a tango dancer, well, two tango dancers. They will at times walk in one direction, and then this is in phase synchronization, and at times they are in opposite directions, right? Mm-hmm. But it looks like a flow. Why does that work? Because both have the same mental model of the world. They have a shared reality in that moment. And this is what we need to create in families, that shared reality and the purpose. So they converge upon it and they travel in one direction and do all the things necessary to deal with the hiccups that they may encounter in a world of VUCA.
Yes. In the example that I was giving in a little bit of our role play, would you go about meeting with me individually, meeting with a spouse, meeting with a child or any other integral family member individually, and then bring us together? If we're looking to go from bottom up as opposed to me dominating top down, how would you go about your synchronization as you describe?
Well, again, for example, creating a family narrative is a good thing. It brings people together. By that, I don't mean a family chronology. I mean really a story that is emotional and that is not being shared with anybody else but the family. But in the way of creating it, by teasing out narrative fragments from family members and then come together and find a coherent story, which is going to be a very interesting discussion. And already here we will have various different interpretations of the same thing and emotions and frustrations being ventilated. But these are things that need to come out to actually synchronize the system. And then we have a story which is unifying in the sense that we sit on a train, on a plane, and we reflect like on a good book on that story. That creates an embodied cognition and an attractor where people say, yeah, okay, now I understand. This is beautiful. This is fascinating. I'm open for having a form of family governance or changing it. Because some people like us, we have a family constitution, we have got family governance, but we did this 10 years ago. Is that still the same? No, the system has changed, so the governance should change. So for example, that is one example. Using narratives in form of doing that. And of course, I would love to accompany you and see how we can synchronize the system. And once the system is synchronized, we also can talk about contentious matters in the family governance, or maybe they're no longer contentious because now I understand what's going on.
If I could just push back just a pinch, and I mean it in a positive way, I may ask you, given you're a fifth generation family member, an old quote unquote business with now lots of family members. So you've been through things that, in my example of a role play, I may never have that opportunity. It may take 100 years to get the volume of family members and the complexity of the decision making, in my opinion, which is why extra the importance of governance. So my question to you, maybe you're talking about bottom up, mutually, we're all working together. But, and again, maybe I learned a little bit too classically in business. There's no statues to committees, there's statues to amazing individuals that change dynamics and change the world. How important, even in what you're describing, is one person to be a champion, one person to be a leader, and are they kind of driving a shared culture?
Leadership, transformational leadership is another very good example. And look, in terms of synchronization, I don't think one dimension is enough. You need to come from multiple dimensions: leadership, narratives, family engagement, all these things. Using the design thinking process, for example, to create a succession plan, which was an idea of my good fellow family Hippocampus founding member, Octavian Graf Pilati. These are all things. And by the way, design thinking process has proven to foster interbrain synchronization. So has listening to the same story, let alone creating the same story. That is what brings people together. And once we have created that synchronization goal, or have achieved it, whatever it might look like, guess what? The next day it looks different. So we need to keep at it. It's not a one-off.
And how do I engage if I have a family office that tends to be a little bit linear on, I do tax, I do legal, I do household management, I do finance, whatever. How does the CEO, family member or not, president who's heading up the SFO, how important is governance for them to understand and coordinate with the family, if nothing else, to mitigate the three big risks that we identified earlier?
Well, I guess also for trust companies, it's a problem when you have 20 family members and you have to deal with 25 opinions. So a synchronized system would allow you to be more agile in your allocation, in making decisions, in getting a quick response to maybe a new fact that came up on a tax side. And yes, you can say, yeah, of course, yeah, then I call the patriarch and he's the boss and he will tell me, done. And the rest of the family left out. As we talked earlier, it may have repercussions in a freer world of pluralism and individuation. It can happen, right? So, but when we have a synchronized system, everyone is behind the speaker, if you will, and you have a quick decision, and you have all the family members done and in. Because there's another thing: if you make an investment today, and it goes wrong, when people make money, no one asks questions. If it goes wrong, what do? That alone can shock the system, perturb the system, and send it into a transition phase, which can be detrimental for the system. If everyone is on board, if everyone consented wholeheartedly, and things go wrong, well, guess what? You make sure you actually get through this together, and make it even a success for everyone in the family. So this is why I'm banging on about the synchronicity.
In what you've learned over your academia and in practice, coupled with being a fifth generation family member, looking back one generation, I guess that would be to your parents or the involvement in the family enterprise, what if you could wave the magic wand and go back, whatever it is, 25, 30 years ago, what would you tell them and what would be done differently?
Look, this is an interesting question because we just had a panel on that again with Octavian at Pressfield and Partner.
Of
It
course.
is about various belief bubbles. So in my third generation, my uncle, who sort of the patriarch, if you will, and my mom and aunties, they grew up during the war. They only had kind of they have a very positivistic realism. So there's one reality everyone needs to buy into. And they had sort of a tribal a tribal mindset, actually a conformist mindset. So you have deputies, and you have basically institutionalized your will, which has then been executed by the deputies. And in this kind of world, compliance is everything. This ensures survival. And suddenly, the youngsters come on board, like my generation. And by the way, I'm fourth generation. The family business is now in the fifth generation, so we have fifth generation family members being shareholders. So the fourth generation, been working in banks. Yeah, we looked at balance sheets, and suddenly also have a more relativistic realism, meaning that we understand that there are as many realities than people in the room, and that we need to inquire about these things. Already goes into the critical realism, and employ critical thinking, which was in the previous generation discouraged. Now, we also have been brought up in a more pluralistic world, which clashes big time with a world of positive realism.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly it's no longer about solidarity, loyalty, and stewardship. Only it is about different opinions, creating collective intelligence, being critical, asking, understanding, thinking about KPIs. So, when your KPIs are turnover and market share, well, it doesn't buy you much, does it? So suddenly we're all about return on capital and all these things, and pushing for these things. And it got me also emotionally in big trouble with the patriarch. And this is a fight we have to fight as a next, or had to fight as a next generation, 3 to 4. And I think, if we're not taking the trees, we're not doing our job as next gen. Now, the fifth generation is completely free of that. They don't give a toss. They just ask questions. So, which also tells me that these belief bubbles that have been transferred in terms of value transfer to our generation, and we adopted it, and then we started to adapt it. And the fifth generation already adapted it. So yeah, there is a generational divide, and the only way you can actually heal that is by synchronizing the belief bubbles, which means not only next gen has to learn, which I read everywhere. Next gen needs to be educated. Yes, old gen as well. They need to understand what is the mental model, the belief bubbles of the next generation. Maybe there's something to learn for them. And the other way around, because otherwise you will have one generation judging the other and misunderstanding each other. So there's, for example, also it's actually a case where the parent said, look, yes, we want you to carry on with the business. And so they expected to receive thanks. And the next generation, yeah, this is great. Here's the business plan. This is what we do. Da, 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 da. And they were, hang on a minute. Don't you have the respect for what we did? And based on this judgment, the whole thing collapsed until they spoke. This is what I mean. They met in a room of ambivalence, in a room of non-psychological safety, misunderstandings, information asymmetry, conflict, frictions until they got to talk. And this is where they synchronize.
It's amazing what communication could do. Could I argue with a larger family unit that is more dispersed, and in a world post-COVID where we're more comfortable with digital communication, Zoom, whatever, Microsoft Teams, StreamYard, whatever it might be, that what you just described is going to be more common and harder in terms of the elders and the rising generation to listen to each other, to learn, and effectively have a process, I guess you could say, for decision making. We didn't have the time today to get into a breakdown of committees, of boards, consensus, non-consensus. What's the perfect number? Is it 3? But suppose the family unit's 55. How is that rotated in or out? Again, audience, I know this. These are, this could be like a masterclass in and of itself, effectively over multiple days. And you may all think it may be, quote unquote, it's boring, but this is the subject, effectively governance, decision making. And we brought in words you probably normally don't hear in a governance arena: synchronization, risk analysis, mitigation, understanding anti-fragility. But all of this comes in under the auspice of governance. So what is a final question from the perspective of the elders, and then the perspective of a rising generation in your family, the 5th? What could they each learn from the other?
Active listening. And by the way, also what I was alluding to earlier, patriarchs are becoming younger and also being brought up in a more pluralistic world. So I think it will get easier. But the older generation had their fights, their emotional fights, their ups and downs, their near-death experiences with the business, how they overcame it, and all these things. That resilience, the grit that brought them to where they are today, is not what the youngsters have. And I think what the youngsters have is ideas, dreams, pluralism, more openness, by the way, also for topics like emotional and social intelligence. So they can learn that from the older generation without the older generation superimposing what they have experienced on the next generation. Kind of, son, if you don't do this my way, you will fail. No, give son the possibility to adapt that information in today's world, and don't superimpose your experience in your world. It may not be the same today, but still the experience you went through, sharing that and being open about it, being vulnerable already is a huge plus when you want to create a safe space. So here again, Angelo, it's not you do this and that this is happening. There's multiple tangents when you just share one thing about yourself and be vulnerable.
Wow, everyone, that has been Nick von Eynern. It was really a pleasure to have him on today. Unfortunately, not visual. That would have made it maybe a little more interactive for the audience. I highly recommend you read everything that he's done. Again, it was kind of game-changing for me, and I've been in the business forever. And I know a lot of wonderful, amazing people that I noted effectively, broadly in the world of governance. But the opportunity of, for me, identifying my blind spots, moving any ego aside, and being a lifelong learner, changed some of my paradigms, because simply how the world works, it is kind of different now than it was 5 or 10 years ago. Not everything that you think is evergreen is evergreen. Dynamics are changing and you need to adapt. And again, I go back to, it's not the strongest or the smartest. It is those that are going to have the capability of adaptation or being able to adapt. And yes, again, all of that, like I described throughout, plays into the value of governance. You're in finance, you're in legal, you're in accounting, and you want to have an edge on your competitors. You're kind of a commodity. I mean that respectfully. There may be a tiny percentage of you that are so competent, so brilliant, that you're doing something that is so proprietary or that gives an edge. And even if you're top 1% in legal, there's millions of attorneys. So there's going to be hundreds of others of peers that the great families are going to kind of be familiar with, depending on their region and a variety of different topics. So how you get an edge, in my opinion, is effectively your communication, your emotional intelligence, and your capability to understand beyond your given skill set into the true dynamics of families through governance. And you could do it because your competitors effectively aren't. So your benchmark to go from knowing nothing to knowing something, it's actually not that high. As a lot of things in the family office, the institutional level and rigor, honestly, it's not great. I think it's getting a little better, and hopefully you'll begin to get a lot better because I think that'll be better for everyone. But the issues pertaining to family governance, who in the family is focused on the family, because that is going to be the greatest threat to the family, and governance, especially with the rising generation and the challenge of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves, is effectively the answer. It's an answer that adapts all the time. You can't just study it 20 years ago, a year ago. And like Nick said, all these things have to be revisited in some ways, probably even more than once a year. So when you're adapting, it really is never ending. And this was important to me from my heart. And I wanted to, again, an audience that may only look at the family office world from a very linear perspective of investing, of taxation. Great, keep on doing that. But you're wrong if you don't look at the total holistic picture and the value and importance to the family, what we broadly define, and Nick made it engaging and used some unique words that you may not have heard of tied into the community, but governance effectively is going to be everything. Nick, for those that would like to learn more about your work, engage with your organization, Family Hippocampus, how could they follow you? How could they learn more? And how could they reach out?
We have a LinkedIn page. We have a web page. This is www.family-hippocampus.com. And feel free to send me an email via LinkedIn. Very happy to engage and to talk more.
Great. I'm going to add a little bit more color to that. Again, I've been in this industry a long, long time. I'm an OG. I'm an old man, whatever you want to call me. Like, Nick is very, very impressive. So his formal name is Dominik, but friends call him Nick. That would be V. And last name is Eynern. Him and I believe, and also another founding partner who's a wonderful gentleman for Family Hippocampus. One word, Hippocampus, technically LTD. Make sure to follow him and the company on LinkedIn. Reach out to them on any medium they're on. Subscribe to anything they're in. Look at their great white papers and research and engage. Don't just be a bystander. Do you learn how to play? Now I got an international audience. What you all call football, we call soccer here in the US. But what you all call football, do you learn it best by reading a book about it or by actively engaging, preferably through a guru, a mentor, so you're hands-on in your experience? You know the answer to that. Now, it may not be quite as bifurcating as the example I gave in the family office world compared to a sport, but it's kind of similar. It's similar enough. So, spend some time and money and go from 0 to 100. Be the best that you can be. And there's lots of great resources for you out there. So for me, you all know me to reach out to me through my current site, which is my name, angelorobles.com. I'm active on 2 accounts on YouTube, Family Office TV and Family Office. My Family Office one has been around forever. It's much, much larger, but I'm doing unique and different things on Family Office TV. I'm also very active on LinkedIn. And many of you know, obviously, from my business perspective, that primarily relates to what I do at Family Office Masterclass. And I do have a private organization for an intimate group of founding charter members that are family and SFOs only, called SFO Continuity. But I do like to give information as well as I could for free and provide value and hopefully share great interviews, primarily through Family Office TV, relative to people like Nick, Jay Hughes, and others in economics, geopolitics, and investing. So thank you all for being supporters. Feel free to reach out. And even if you forget about me, that's fine. Nick is the star today. Have a chance to follow and reach out to him I'm a huge fan and a huge advocate of his work, and look forward to having Nick you on much more often in the future. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me and your endorsements, and have a wonderful day and a
My
good
pleasure.
weekend.
Thank you so much. Well earned.
Bye.
Bye-bye.